Rachel. So as Rachel and Louise were saying, as workplace specialists, we're really keen to reach out to you all as business owners and your organisations, as we've all moved across the world to new territory with the global pandemic impacting on all aspects of the way we work, the way we live, how we connect with each other and how we do business. We recognise that we've needed to adapt and move at great pace, really, to translate our tried and tested working practices and the way that we do business usually. And we've transported that to either remote offerings or to recreate our core offerings to our business. So it's been an interesting time for many of us, hasn't it? We don't often talk about our mental health and our business at the same time, but perhaps this is a time to get the nation talking as we contemplate how we adjust to the new ways of working. And as Louise said, this situation isn't going to go away quickly. So trying to adjust and appreciate the impact of COVID-19 is key. Now, evidence suggests that our mental health has significant impact on the way that we do business and on our business's performance. Organisations certainly need to get advice, take stock of where you're at and step up their mental health support for employees to ensure a resilient and productive workforce that can cope with the change moving forward in the new normal. Prior to the coronavirus, though, many of you will be aware that mental health was a dominant health need of our time, not only in the Northwest, where I live in England, but nationally and globally. So some of you will be familiar with the statistic that 1 in 4 of us experience a diagnosable mental health problem in any given year. So even on this call, that's quite a number of us, isn't it, today? And it has to be that mental health is an area as business owners that we consider and have on the radar. Again, thinking about the numbers prior to this pandemic, 91 million working days were lost every year, costing the UK economy between 70 and 100 billion pounds, which is an enormous amount, isn't it, to even contemplate. And of course, thinking about the impact of COVID, it is too early to measure that at this stage, but it's already predicted to have significant impact on our business costings and on individuals' well-being. So it has to be on the radar. We need to be looking at health and well-being generally, and in particular mental well-being needs to be a priority area for yourself, your teams, because ultimately you are your organisation and also your teams are the greatest assets to your business as well. As a business owner myself, I often have to give myself a regular talking to practice what I preach. And some of you that are on the call that know me well, it won't be the first time that you'll have heard me say that. And please don't think that Rach, Louise and I, because we know the theory, we also know how to put it into practice on a day-to-day basis. We're constantly working at that. But as a business owner myself, I can reflect back to those initial weeks of lockdown. And when I think about it, you know, the work was unprecedented. I was trying to put packages together to send out to all my clients to offer support and some clarity, because we seem to have been propelled into this environment, a situation that we weren't prepared for. So I was trying to do that whilst juggling, managing my own cash flow and those support staff that I have working for wellbeing for performance. So really transporting all aspects of my working life into the virtual world was hugely stressful when I look back. Rach, Louise, what was life like for you in those initial weeks of lockdown, Rach? What would you say?
It was, I mean, I talk a lot about the hysteria in the first few weeks. We'd seen this sort of very slow uptake and there might be a problem, there might be a problem. And then we went from here to here in what felt like a minute. And so hysterical personally, and from a business perspective, there was just no clarity that, you know, I answered a lot of questions with, I don't know the answer to that right now. I'm hoping we get more guidance. So yeah, hysteria is a word that will stay with me forever about those first few weeks.
And it was changing, wasn't it, Rach, day to day? The information was hard to keep abreast of. No, thank you for that. What about you, Louise?
Oh, I remember it so well, because the first thing that happened to me literally within days was part of my business, which I just set up a couple of years ago and was really gaining some traction, was around ski coaching. So coaching skiers who are really, really anxious and want to overcome their anxiety. And I had a course all set up in Italy, in northern Italy. And of course, these things take a lot of doing, getting the right people on board, and was really excited about doing it. It was the second one I was running in the season, and it just fell off the edge of the cliff just like that. It's like, stopped, it has to be cancelled immediately. So that was kind of the first immediate impact on me. It's kind of like, oh my goodness, this is really here, it's really happening. But I think also very much so the clients that I was supporting, I remember one in particular whose business, he'd moved it to home. He was working for quite a challenging chief exec, and he suddenly found the demands that were being made on him were extraordinary. It was like he was available 24/7 on Zoom. He was trying to manage his family, his home life, his work was merging into it, and he was getting really, really stressed. It was overspilling into the weekends, and he was really struggling to put some boundaries and framework around his work in the home environment. And that was really magnifying the stress and anxiety that was having. You could see it all unfolding, and I think he was one of many out there. So it was that immediate impact that had on me, on my business, when I'm supporting others who were having different challenges, but really hard. So yeah, it was a tough time. It was a challenging time.
No, definitely. And like you were saying, it was the pace at which that happened as well, Louise, wasn't it? No, thanks for that. Now, what we'd like you to do, all of you attended today, is to think back what life was like for you in those initial weeks. And if you just put a word or a phrase into the chat now, that would be really, really helpful. And think about what was life like then initially, and ask yourself, has it moved or changed? So if you want to put a word or a phrase in, what was your feelings those initial weeks, and perhaps what it was like now. And if it's the same, that's fine. So if you were to send that to Rach, or to everyone, it doesn't really matter, and Rach will collate that in a minute, and you'll give us the common themes, won't you, Rach, in a minute? But while you're doing that, I just wanted to share with you a call that on the day of lockdown, I remember being sat on my mobile phone in the car before I finished my working day, and I had this conversation with an experienced NHS consultant that I've worked quite closely with over several years, and he's a really calm, experienced individual, and as he told me that they were going into a state of emergency, I just remember him talking about the chaos in the hospital, and he said, Julie, it's such chaos here. And as he spoke those words, I could hear like the anxiety and the tone of his voice shook as he was speaking, and clearly it reflected the level of uncertainty that we were all facing. And I have to say, that particular day, I then put the phone down, and I did get really upset on my own, and I just realised the sense of enormity that what we were preparing for. And working in the NHS for a number of years, and all these civilian disaster protocols and procedures that we've all practiced were now actually being put into place for what lay ahead. So I just wanted to share that with you while you were putting your thoughts into the chat. Rach, what's come out of the chat? What are attendees saying there?
They were all with me in these first few weeks, because all of these things I felt intensely. I've got to say, there is such an overwhelming sense that everybody has been in the same boat, and I think it's really important in sessions like this to normalise how we've all felt. And again, I'm an employment law solicitor, so this sort of stuff isn't my bag, but I can definitely comment on how I felt and how I continue to feel. I love it. Fast and furious initially, that is for sure. Initially overwhelming, there's definitely been a sense of overwhelming and uncertainty, and I love that. Very difficult and chaotic. Yeah, wasn't sure of my name for a little while, I've got to say. Yeah, anxiety and anxious about income, manic, rabbit in headlights, 1000%. Probably not having many of the answers. And I think if we have a look now, adapting to what's happening and going on, but going a little stir crazy indoors. Yeah, completely agree with that. Can't wait to get back to the office, but anxious about everybody getting back there safely. It's absolutely key, that looking forward. which, you know, I think is quite hard to do right now. We're so in the here and now, aren't we? And just a couple of weeks ahead, it's really hard to think about further than that. So yeah, really.
No, it's interesting. Thanks for that, everyone. Thanks, Rachel. I think what's key there is that we're all feeling in a similar zone, and it's normalizing that within your teams and your families and your businesses, because we need to be asking people how they're feeling so that we can move on. And we're going to find out more about the moving on bit, because that's where we have to look forward to getting the right mindset to be able to look at the new norm. So I'm going to hand over to Louise now, who's going to give you greater insight into the key considerations around the change curve. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks, Julie. Yes, so normally our mental health is about managing the ebb and flow of the daily stressors in our lives, isn't it? And I think that this is just such an unprecedented stress, which is affecting every aspect of our lives, but also for everyone at the same time. I mean, never before have we had to deal with the enormity of the impact of something as significant as COVID. And whilst it poses an overwhelming, unprecedented threat to our physical well-being, you know, as Julie mentioned, the fact that we're in isolation, it's affected our freedom of movement, our socialising, just being able to catch up with our friends and our ability to work, and the fact that we've had to change how we work so quickly. You know, who knew that we'd be conducting so many things on Zoom? But it's the emotional impact, which is hidden with uncertainty, that insecurity, vulnerability, and the isolation, which I think is really affecting our mental health. And that's the key areas that we need to be addressing. And what I would like to say, though, and I know it's been mentioned already, is that feeling these strong emotions is a normal reaction. And in fact, if you weren't, then that would be far more concerning. And it's a shock that makes us stop and think and kind of try and process the enormity of this changing environment. And to me, it's almost like taking our breath away. It's like suddenly being plunged in cold water after that shock and that sense of panic. You know, it's that taking a moment to regain control of our breathing, calm ourselves down, have a clear mind to move forwards and to move away from this danger that's being posed around us. But what I would say that is really normal, but it's when those feelings of panic and anxiety start to become overwhelming that it doesn't serve as a purpose anymore. We need to have that clarity of mind to find our way forward out of this. And making sense of how we feel and why is a really important first step in managing our mental health. How you're coping will impact on your family, your friends, your business and your colleagues. So it's looking after yourself first and understanding your own mental health. So you're then in a much stronger position to help those around you. So one of the things that I thought would be really helpful would be to help make sense of how we're feeling and why the emotions that we have are changing, which they are changing over the period of time, is to introduce you to a model called the change curve developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. This has been widely used as a method of helping us understand our reactions to significant change, and it really resonated with me. And because I felt it reflected the emotions and behaviours that we're witnessing in our response to COVID. And I thought it'd be helpful just to talk through to help rationalise how we're feeling. You know, we've already displayed on the chat that there's a wealth of emotions and feelings out there, and we'll all be feeling different things at different times. And this model outlines our emotional journey in 3 stages really, really clearly. So the first stage is around the shock and denial. And you'll see on the graph there, right up at the top, that moment when COVID hits the UK. The shock was that first reaction to hearing about the impact of COVID, that moment that takes our breath away. It puts us on that kind of high alert, heightening our senses, and we're searching to make sense of that situation. And I just remember back in January, in the early stages, it all just seemed so far removed, you know, thinking, oh my goodness, how tough it was for China, and particularly the people in Wuhan, and to go into a lockdown like that, never thinking that it could be us within weeks. And the shock came for me in that week building up to the lockdown, when it's combined with confusion. You know, what do I do about my business trip that had taken me months to set up? You know, do I cancel it? Really? Do I really have to do that? What should I do? There's questions. And it's at this stage of that we really need that communication. We need that wealth of guidance and reassurance about the virus, its impact, and how we're going to manage it, so we can start to process the enormity of the situation. And as Rachel was saying, you know, there was a lot of information being put out, but it wasn't very clear. It was creating confusion and uncertainty and anxiety. And it's a shock at this stage, which is really compounded by that lack of information and that fear of the unknown. And after we've gone through that initial shock phase, then we start to experience the denial. And this is when we focus on the past, you know, kind of everything was okay as it was. Why do we need to change? And I was certainly there. Oh my goodness, I was resisting. I look back and think, how could I resist cancelling my trip You know, it was in northern Italy after all, even though it's quite a long way from where the main areas was. I just wanted to carry on as normal. I didn't want to have to make these changes. And I just see how I resisted that so hard. And there's also this wider disbelief that the virus will really impact on us. You know, surely not the UK. We could never imagine that we'd have to close down our country and social isolate. It's like, seriously. I think Donald Trump was classic in providing an example of this. And he said, well, it'll go away. You know, just stay calm, it'll go away. And yet before they knew it, America was the new epicenter of the virus. And it felt so surreal. And even now, I kind of feel like I'm just stepping into an episode of Spooks, you know, where they do the news headlines and they blaze the trails. It's like every day is another episode of Spooks. And overcoming this denial phase, communication is really, really key. This is when we need to be informed and understand the progress and how it's spreading and the impact on our health and business, and communication to help ourselves, but also within our businesses to support our staff, how it will affect us right here and now in our communities and in the wider context of the economy, so we can start to make decisions about our businesses, about how we're going to cope financially, what support's going to be able to be available to us. And being kept well informed about the measures we can take. I mean, do you remember back? I mean, it seemed like a lifetime ago, and it was sing happy birthday twice and wash your hands for 20 seconds. My goodness, we've come a long way since then. And so the challenge, I would say, for us as leaders is not only managing ourselves, but it's also managing our businesses, the impacts, having the welfare of our staff and managing their anxiety and concerns. Rach, how did you feel about the impact of COVID as it started to take effect? Does that resonate with you? Do you recognise that?
Yeah, for sure. I think what we certainly saw with some of our clients is that the impact started early for one or two of them, perhaps who had international, their business was based on visitors coming over from China, from Italy, from Portugal. And so we saw this slow progress of, oh, there is a problem here, we think it's going to impact us. And I think then for a little while, I was the same. Oh, this will just impact one or two businesses. We aren't going to see this so far reaching. And I've actually got one or two clients in hospitality, and you can imagine overnight that went from doors were open to doors were shut. And we just went through a great deal of back and forth. And I think that shock and certainly the denial of, oh, this can't be happening. And then it almost creeping out into, regardless of what industry you're in, there is an impact. So yeah, we definitely went through the shock and the denial, almost hiding my head under a pillow.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and you're right. It's, you know, certain sectors where it literally hit within 24 hours. Really challenging. You know, the travel industry and hospitality being two really key areas. But coming through that shock and denial phase, that's when we kind of move into the next stage, which is around anger and depression. And anger is often the first thing that happens, and it's anger about everything that we've worked towards is slipping through our fingers. You know, that it's all disappearing, that we've put so much energy into our businesses, and how can this happening, and who can we blame? This is when we start to look for a scapegoat, and we start to look at the resilience of our business as well, and whose fault is this? You know, who can we turn to? And I think Trump had a really classic example. He was very quick to blame the Chinese. And then there've been episodes running through the news about lack of PPE, abstract testing strategies, really kind of people searching and looking, well, whose fault is this? Who can we blame this for? Because that's actually channeling that blame almost allows that continuation of denial, that it provides us with an alternative focus away from our own fears and anxieties. And it was really interesting to see how that really played out in the press. And we also, the other common feelings that can be associated with this are suspicion and frustration and skepticism. And this is when the conspiracy theories really started to flow. I mean, there's poor guys who are putting up the 5G mast lanes who are getting attacked because of the whole conspiracy around 5G. And it also, interesting enough, reflected in our general reluctance as a society to follow the initial guidance. And you know, we're up here in the Northwest, and you know, the sunshine is a treat for up here in the Northwest. And I don't really remember, but that first weekend of lockdown, everybody head to the beauty spots and the beaches. It was, Snowdonia had, I think, its busiest day ever. The lockdown just happened to coincide with that gorgeous sunny weekend. I mean, it was positively Mediterranean. And so the government then has had to whip up their legislation and give the police extra powers to really reinforce those restrictions. We were really quite suspicious. Everybody kind of knew they were there and saying, okay, right, we'll be outside, we'll social isolate, but weren't following to the letter. And I think during this phase is a really challenging phase, because it kind of brings us to that lowest point of the curve, when the anger begins to wear off and the realization that this change is genuine starts to strike home. The enormity of the financial implications, that change in our lifestyle, the impact on our health starts to really become a reality. That fear of stepping out and maybe catching COVID ourselves or bringing it back into the household. And we know people who've had COVID. Well, I certainly do. And our daughter had it in the household for a couple of weeks and had to self-isolate, but also heard the really harrowing news stories of what people were going through, people losing loved ones and having to grieve in self-isolation, and seeing the death rates going up. So you can understand why this is the point when morale can get really low and the anxiety levels can really start to peak, as we're at that bottom of that curve. So it can be really hard to express our feelings during this stage. Depression, the very nature of it, doesn't mean you step back into yourself, you kind of close down, and it's understanding, it's seeing that and reflecting who around you might be vulnerable to that sense of being out of control, which really compounds it. That Julie's already mentioned a lot of the signs and symptoms you can look for in changes in yourself and in colleagues, but one of them I'd also say is people who go very quiet, they become very inward, they become very very removed, they're removing themselves. So we all cope in different ways, because if you think about our anchors in life, have all been taken away from us. Our normal routines, our visiting our families, seeing our friends, coping with our elderly relatives in isolation. And I think coping with people's changed behaviours when out and about is also really challenging. And I certainly remember going to the supermarket for the first time and making eye contact and smiling in that engaging, positive way that you do, and somebody's looking away from me thinking, oh, God, what did I do? And it's like almost though I was the COVID virus moving around the supermarket, and then past somebody else at a distance, they turned and faced the shelf, and it was like, oh, it was creating this anxiety inside me. It was like, actually, no, I need to remember that's their way. They've got a different story going on at home, that I need to respect their way of dealing with it. But it made me feel like I was entering an alien and hostile environment. And so at this stage, it's that focus really becomes on ourselves, our family and friends, the problems around that. We can start to feel really overwhelmed by its impact and that uncertainty of the future, and the enormity that it's having and how it is impacting on us and on our businesses and on our family and friends. And what I would say at this stage is really reiterate that these reactions are a normal emotional response, and it's really reassuring to, you're probably looking at the change curve now and probably just thinking in mind where you are on it and where you have been, to see that actually it is okay to feel like this. It is. And Julie, we've had a lot of conversations around this, and what do you feel about your journey through the last 2 months really around the change curve and everything that you've dealt with?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Louise, because if I'm honest, there's been days when I've been absolutely fine, and then other days when I've thought, actually, I don't know if I'm going to recover from this in terms of business, and actually, how am I going to find my way out of it? So there's been some, really dark days, really, looking at that curve. It brings it home to me. And I can certainly identify with what you were saying about the supermarket. We normally go out and we're chatting and we're not bothered about being close to others, whereas I did find myself literally wanting to nip in and out. And even the most resilient individuals, and I do appreciate that there's many leaders out there that will have experienced feelings as I did, that where do we go from here? Even the most resilient person is going to feel it. And you're totally right, Louise, it's normal, and it's part of the process in trying to process what's actually happening, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I, just what you're saying, that looking back on how I went through a really busy phase. I seemed to be filling my day and having lots and lots to do and having a list that I never got to the end, and that seemed to be my way of coping. And I've sort of moved through into this much calmer phase, putting lots of space in, reflecting, really loving having put something like this together. And it's seeing how you do move through things to really bring us to this final stage of acceptance and integration. And this is where that anger and that depression, that anxiety starts to ebb away, and you get that more optimistic and positive mood begins to emerge. And this is when we start to accept that the change is inevitable, and we start to begin to work with those changes rather than against them. This is like our new normal. And we start to appreciate that life post-COVID is going to be different to how it was before, but that's okay. And this is reflected in our businesses as we're looking for new opportunities and ways of working. And it can be transformational for many businesses who are resilient. There are others that won't make it. And that in itself brings many great challenges. But for many, they're looking and searching for that newfound optimism, hope, that acceptance emerges, that we've had a chance to reflect. We found ways of improving our resilience within our businesses, and we appreciate that what we have is good and that change can be for the better. I think focusing on these new opportunities and the relief that we're finally coming through it gives us that real sense that progress can be made, and that's really good. That's very empowering. We're starting to take control again. We've reflected on what we can learn from these experiences. That's great feedback. And by the time we reach this stage, that change situation has almost replaced the original one, and this is our new reality. And let's say everybody's referring to this as a new normal, and that's not a term we would have ever heard of before, but actually it really resonates. I think it's really true.
So definitely, Louise, it's interesting as you're talking, I can just identify so much with what you said. For me, as I moved into the acceptance phase, I found it was a very gradual thing, that I started to focus on what I was in control of, and I found that in itself quite empowering to do that. When you're thinking about the actual change curve, Louise, what are the key points to remember, the takeaways from that?
I think one of the main key points is that we are all individuals. We all have our own map of the world, and we all react differently to change. There is no right and wrong here, and not all of us will experience every phase. And I think that as leaders, we need to be very mindful of that with supporting the people in our businesses. That some people may need a lot of time to go through stages 1 and 2, whilst others who are more accustomed to change and more resilient can move swiftly through into stage 3. So it's really that it's fluid. And although it's generally acknowledged that, with a model like this, you will go from stage 1 to stage 3 and finally end up at stage 3, is that there is no right and wrong sequence here, and you can move freely within each. And Julie and I were only reflecting last week. We felt, weren't we, about how we kind of regret a little bit as they changed lockdown, and we're in a much longer haul now. And talking to another colleague, and they said, "Well, I suddenly feel like there's a dark shadow being cast over the UK. This is just kind of just having to reset myself here." And it's that fluidity and being mindful that does change our emotions as we're dealing with these different challenges. But I think also it's being very mindful for those around you who are perhaps more vulnerable to anxiety and depression, and the challenge to make sure that they don't get stuck in either phase 1 or phase 2, because these are where you can really become overwhelmed by the enormity of events. And whilst it can serve you a purpose to go through that phase, you don't want to get stuck in it. And I think that this can be really exacerbated by self-isolation, which really brings me on to the final key point here, which is about communication. How important that communication is, about being in touch with your colleagues, your friends and family, and enabling yourself and others to move through that curve. As leaders, it's about us finding ways to move into acceptance and integration and stay connected with people who really motivate and inspire us. And this has been the great thing about collaboration. It's been a wonderful experience, because Julie and Rachel are people who motivate and inspire me, and that's been fabulous to work with them, to provide support for each other, to inspire each other, and then to share this with you. And then the final thing that I would say about this phase is that having that inner motivation to move through to phase 3, that you need to have that drive, that desire to come out the other end, to see that light at the end of the tunnel, with a real focus on creating that positive mindset and a strategy for taking control of life again. And for me, this was about establishing routines and setting goals and new connections. Because I'd say that within our businesses, good communication is essential to keep in touch with our staff, keeping them updated and having those regular conversations, check in with how they are and listening to how they are, so that you can then support them and embed them with your new positive mood of the business, so they can see that sense of direction, that sense of purpose and where you're going, to enable them to overcome the challenges. Because it's not uncommon to say to return, to regress back into the earlier stages, but it's being mindful of that and how you can move forward. And let's say, Julie, we've had many conversations around this, haven't we?
Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it? I think we'd all quite got used to lockdown, and over the 8 weeks we'd adjusted to a new way of working from home, and we'd kind of just started to learn the routines of our day-to-day life and how we could get around problems. And then all of a sudden the government announced a change of strategy. So the Be Alert, what did that mean? And again, I think you and I have spoken, Louise, we were talking to clients who were feeling the same. It you know, posed so many questions. I think some of the things that you've just highlighted are key to reinforce that, you know, identifying those people that maybe pre-COVID experienced anxiety and depression, remembering the statistics of how common that is before COVID. They're the types of vulnerable groups and individuals that we really need to look out for. So identifying those people that may get stuck, Louise, as you said, and also to try and encourage and empower people with that inner motivation to focus on things they can be in control of is really important. And it's those small steps, isn't it, to help us then, once Boris Johnson had announced the next phase to moving things forward, that we then learn a new structure and a new way forward.
Yeah, no, that's so right. It is. It's coping with that change, isn't it? That we do get into our routines, we do establish our new normal, and then it's change again, and then we reestablish it and change again. And I think that you know, that's one of the challenges that we're having to cope with. And certainly that last press conference, it was like, oh my goodness, you know, it's not going to be back to normal by July and August. Might not be going to Spain in September. This looks like it's going to go on for a much longer time, and dealing with that. And I think, you know, Julie, as you're saying, it's about reflecting on your own well-being, going through these transition of changes, but that of your teams and your colleagues, and your families and their emotional well-being. And Julia, you know, if you'd like to carry on with that conversation, I think you've got some really insightful things to share with us.
That's right. I think when you start to think about giving yourself time to stop, rest, reflect on yours, your teams, your colleagues, your family's emotional well-being, it's time well invested, because as you said, Louise, you remember you got busy, and so did I, and that often is a mask for stress, isn't it? And it manifests itself in different ways for different people. So there's many things we can do support and manage our well-being, especially during such uncertain times that we're in at the moment. And as we start to think about preparing for recovery for our businesses, although it's still uncertain, there's still an awful lot we can do. And I think it's, you mentioned about keeping connected. So I think we've all, you know, put on our offerings onto the virtual platforms, investing in relationships, remembering those things, whether it's at work, at home, whether it's relationships with your pets. All these relationships are key. They anchor us in terms of well-being, and it's just finding different ways of doing things, making time to listen to each other. And actually, like you were saying, Louise, it's okay not to be okay, and it's about creating those opportunities just for us to talk about how we're feeling. And try and transport any sort of communication into the virtual platform so that we can see each other, because seeing each other, I know some of my customers are on this call today, it's just so nice to see people's faces, and that helps the connection. But being self-aware, we talked about, you know, many of us get busy. Being self-aware is something we need to be quite honest with ourselves about, don't we? Often people who attend the Mental Health First Aid England courses say, I want to be a first aider, Julie, in mental health. And I say, that's great, but mental health first aid starts with you. So it's about being honest and true to yourself, saying, you know, what am I finding hard? What am I finding I'm managing with? And actually to ask yourself, where am I on that curve? And then ask other people, talk about the change curve, the shock, the denial, the anger, the depression, and then the acceptance as we start to think about the new norm. And so I can't stress enough the importance of having those conversations about COVID. And also, you know, if people express fear, anxiety, and still appear stuck in those early stages, to make sure that you are offering empathetic words and encouragement for them to perhaps access further support and advice. I can't emphasize enough how important structure is in each day. We are creatures of habit. So it's about making sure that our new structure, if we're working from home remotely, or if we've got a new outline to our usual working day, that we stick to it, and we give ourselves nice happy moments throughout the day, little treats as well. Providing reassurance that obviously when you're supporting other people, that emotional reaction is normal. It's okay not to be okay, but remember that you're not superhuman as well. It's a pandemic after all. Take time to rest, reflect, and bear in mind that ultimately you can't pour from an empty cup. So you as business leaders need to understand where you're at and make sure you're okay. Understanding the reasons why people are feeling the way they are is really useful as a platform to move forward from, I should say. I suppose when we're thinking about mindset and supporting other people as we start to contemplate the recovery, if we can try and start talking as leaders in our organisations to others about this period in time as being merely a different period, a period in our life that's not necessarily a bad one, that one you didn't choose, but more about a different chapter. And just try and encourage people at this stage to be talking about their feelings. Try and have a helicopter view of those people that you feel may be stuck in the earlier phases of the change curve, and try and reflect on your teams and colleagues' emotional well-being, and try and put in little regular structured sessions just to touch base. It may be a well-being chat on a regular basis, or it may be that you're talking about business and you've got those existing reviews already set up that you just add on a little bit about talking about how people are. Remember, small changes can have a huge impact to mental well-being and in terms of recovery. Take the time to care for yourself. We've said that already. And also, please always remember that there is always someone to talk to. So if you identify anyone that's vulnerable close to you or in your teams, please feel confident to give out the Samaritan's number, 116 123, that I know Rachel will pop into the chat for everybody now. And please feel free to put it in your phone. I never know what the day holds, and often having those resources just at hand to share if you're ever concerned about anybody or someone that was vulnerable, it's sometimes useful to have that at your fingertips. Rach, what do you think are the key takeaways from the discussion that we've been having during the session?
Do you know, I've got to say, I think from my perspective, working with a lot of businesses, is that until the leader gets an understanding of where they're at on the curve and how they're responding, you know, we aren't superhumans. I think we like to think we are. I think it's really hard for us then to instill inspiration and drive into our teams. And actually, this is the key moment in some businesses to get us as much from staff as you possibly can. So if you're a business who has seen a huge uptake in the amount of work that you've got, you need as many engaged hands to the pump, if you like. If you're a business who've had to scale back and individuals on furlough with a view to be able to scale once you're able to and the doors are able to open again, you still need to have a grip of where you're at and how you're feeling in order to inspire and drive your staff, because this period will really genuinely, I mean, somebody said a couple of weeks ago on a session I was at, when the tide goes out, you'll see who's swimming naked, and you don't want that to be you. You know, when panic really sets in as the leader and you go, oh my God, what have I been doing? And, you know, I think if you can take the time now to work out where you're at, I love the phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup. I just think it's genius. You can't support your staff and you can't ask them to be engaged and to be driven and to just buy into that this is just another chapter and we just need to get through it if you're not there yet. And if you just need a bit more time. And I think that self-care, I mean, it's such a trendy phrase, isn't it, right now? But, you know, whether that's a walk outside on your own or with somebody from the house with your dog, or whether it's a glass of wine on a Friday night and a Netflix, whatever that is start to take that time so that you can grow and develop. And I've definitely seen that with my clients. So when you look at that curve, I definitely saw the anger and the upset. You know, so many businesses were about to have the year of their career. You know, they were about to smash every target, you know, and all of a sudden in a matter of weeks, they're having to, you know, reassess what they're doing and perhaps change direction slightly. But I love watching business owners now say, do you know what, this has been brilliant actually. I've never had time to stop and think, and I've never had time to assess. A very quick story, one of my clients said, we actually turned the phones off. And that was remarkable because we didn't realize how stressful the phones were. There are so many other ways you can communicate. You don't have to have a ringing phone going all of the time. You know, so businesses are able to find these small nuggets and say, actually, we're going to take real positives out of this. And having that motivation and realizing that there are other ways of working, I just think is key. But it starts with you as the leader, I think. So yeah, I think it's been super helpful. Brilliant. So we're just sort of getting to the end of our session today. So we will share with you a takeaway document over the next couple of days with just some questions for you as the leaders to think about, and also some communication tips, because as I say, your staff will be on this curve. They will be dealing with things slightly differently. They'll have their own personal issues going on. And I think you understanding where they're at will help you, because you'll either be able to move them up the curve and hopefully assist them with that, or be with them at that top of the curve where you can get more drive and enthusiasm out of people because they're sort of coming through the darker sides of it. So we are going to be running another 3 of these sessions on slightly different topics. The next one being about where those pressure points are, how to manage the stress and anxiety personally, but also within your team, what the sort of telltale factors are. So we'll be doing a few more with Julie and Louise, which we're super excited about. We'll also share with you some absolutely fantastic resources. So there's so much free resource out there. Public Health England have got guidance on mental health and how to manage that, because we're certainly going to see an uptick in that. You know, I know the next challenge I have from an employment law perspective dealing with businesses is where we are able to either have people in or start to bring them back, and we get that pushback where people aren't ready for that, or they're a bit scared or nervous about it, which creates those extra stresses and pressures. So we'll share all of that with you. We've also got another great document from Mental Health England, which is Take 10 to Talk. So it's just about how you can engage with staff and address some of the trickier issues. Because once we get to understand how they're coping with it, we can give them the tools to get through it, which I think is that all we all need tools. We all absolutely need tools. So we'll share obviously the contact details of Louise and Julie with everybody as well. The 3 of us are hoping to collaborate over the next few months and continue to collaborate on ways that we can actually support businesses together, because I think what I do from that employment law side, and then what Louise and Julie can bring from a health and well-being and from a mindset perspective, I think is going to be so important. Because I think we have got to the point where we keep on looking a week or 10 days in advance, because that's really all the information or knowledge that we have. And we're going to have to start looking at 6 months, and we have to going to start looking at 9 months. And I think, you know, definitely looking at the comments in the chat from earlier on, uncertainty is, you know, how do I feel right now? Well, a little uncertain. I don't really know what the next stage looks like. And so any way that we're able to support you, you know, we'd be really happy to do that. So before we call it a day, are there any questions that anybody has for us that we're able to ask our trusty experts who we've got on the call today? Okay, so one for Julie. What are the signs of the pressure for individuals that you see in your team? What should we look out for? The stress.
Okay, that's a really good question, because I talked about looking out for vulnerable individuals, but of course even the most resilient of people can experience mental distress, as we've said throughout the session. So what are the things? So the things that come to mind is change in behaviour is key. So if you know individuals, then obviously changes in behaviour. I know it was mentioned in the session about people withdrawing or becoming more silent than usual. So changes in their behaviour that way, maybe an increase in alcohol, drug misuse. I'm hearing on a lot of calls at the moment, a lot of jest about drinking in the garden every night. And whilst it's lovely weather, we just need to be mindful of those parameters when that normal, helpful drinking becomes a prop, because we know that alcohol and drug misuse is certainly an area that men in particular use as a way of coping with their stress, but we're going to talk about that more next week. Another area for recognising distress is obviously emotional upset, or if people actually experience feelings of panic, coming out of the house to go back to work, any challenges like that. But another area to bear in mind is aches and pains. So musculoskeletal aches and pains. We often, when we're stressed and anxious, may look like the swan on the outside, but on the inside, we may be, paddling desperately and trying to keep some calm. And that stress within us then can manifest itself in musculoskeletal issues. So aches and pains in the body. In the workplace as well, it's good to look out for concentration problems. So if there's any sort of memory issues, concentration problems, that's often a sign of mental distress or lack of cooperation. We're trying to change so many different aspects. Those individuals who are not cooperating, they may be struggling. Absenteeism, presenteeism. So when people are absent from the workplace or turn up for the work, but actually aren't there and aren't fit enough to work. Any sort of productivity issues, and overworking rate is a common one. But it's important just to remember 3 quick fixes for stress to take away from today that will give us some foundation for next week. And they are sleep, trying to get rest is key, exercise to release those happy endorphins, whatever it is, whether it's a Joe Wicks workout, a dance, as many of you have been doing, or just being in the garden, having a little walk around, but finding what your thing is for relaxation. So sleep, exercise and relaxation. Is that okay, Rach?
That's perfect. Thank you so much. And obviously, if you've got any feedback on today's session, please share it. We are big enough and grown up enough we can take it. But no, it's been absolutely fantastic having everybody on board, and anything you want to share, any experiences. So if you want to connect with anybody who's been on the call, we'll certainly share with you the next session, which will be coming up in the next couple of weeks, which will be part of a couple more. As I say, we're also from an Evans Ramsey perspective bringing together other experts who'll be able to share lots of other insights. So the first few are about the sort of mindset and us looking after ourselves as business owners and our staff, but also how do we now approach, I hate the phrase, the new normal, but it's something I think I'm going to have to get used to. So thank you so much, everybody. Julie, Louise, thank you. You're fabulous. Such experts, so much knowledge. It's been wonderful having you.
Thank you
very much. All have a fab day. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.